Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're continuing our discussion about the fundamental problems ailing our democracy. And by continuing our discussion, I mean like for the entire time we've been producing any podcast related to politics, that has been the discussion. So just going on, 20 years, a little bit more. But we're also going to provide users a guide for how to turn things around, as well as some real hope that will come out of our current darkness better off than we were before. But to start, here's some context for you. In 1971, tobacco lawyer Lewis Powell wrote a memo warning that Ralph Nader and public interest groups threatened corporate America. And his solution was to invest massively in buying politics, media, schools, and courts, rigging democracy so wealthy interests, not voters, controlled policy. And it became the blueprint for the modern conservative movement. So in short, the system the left has been fighting against for my entire life was literally an anti-democratic conspiracy of the wealth class to buy politics because they knew their deeply unpopular ideas could never pass in a legitimate democracy. It is nothing more complicated than corruption. It's just not done with bags full of cash anymore. But, don't get too distressed, because it turns out that the worse things get, oddly enough, the more likely they are to get substantially better. So stay tuned for that. And although the show is best enjoyed with an attention span, we understand that there's a chance you won't make it to the end. So we sometimes like to give you our conclusion up front, leaving the mystery just being how we got there. So to summarize, step one, recognize how bad things are and get pissed off enough and get enough people pissed off enough to be able to, number two, build movements that are strong enough that politicians can lash themselves to, so that when they go into the halls of power, they can actually hold their own, while they are, three, asking for absolutely everything to change, because that's the level of change we actually need. So today we're starting with a discussion from currentaffairs.org. They talked with David Sirota, who is explaining the problem of money in politics. This is titled, David Sirota Explains How Money Rewrote American Democracy. And after Sirota gave an in-depth explanation of the impact of the Powell memo that I just described, he said this, quote, "To tie it back to campaign finance, they implicitly understood that ultimately they could not get the policies they wanted unless they deregulated the campaign finance system and anti-bribery laws so that they could put in place the elected officials they wanted who would do what they wanted. And then once people are in office, here's the wealth class strategy for keeping them in line." Sirota continues, quote, "If you essentially own the media space to control what is considered a legitimate and politically realistic idea and what is not, if you can surround legislators with not only personnel who are going to give them what you want to give them, but also create the information environment around them, think tanks, policy proposals, and know the campaign finance system at minimum buys access, and by that, buys you access and keeps others who can't pay out, then you don't necessarily have to walk into a congressman's office and give them an envelope of cash, because you've essentially put them in a hermetically sealed bubble of everything that you want," end quote. That is the political system we have right now. It's not bags or envelopes of cash. It is politicians who didn't have to be bought, because the only ones who could get elected were the ones who passed the money primary of being the ones that rich people wanted elected, who are probably perfectly happy being in that hermetically sealed bubble of everything the wealth class wants because they love cozying up to the wealth class.
This was, first of all, it's a really good interview. The book he wrote, Master Plan, The Hidden Plot to Legalize Corruption in America, David Sirota and Jared Mayer, it sounds excellent, but they also did a podcast if you don't feel like reading the book, and I highly suggest checking that out. I was railing in our prior episode, Democracy on the Ropes Part 1, because we have to call this corruption. Like, anytime I say the words money in politics to somebody who is not actually engaged, like already deeply engaged in the world of politics, they just glaze over. Like, it's too much of a euphemism, even though it is accurate. And it's accurate and people glaze over because we're numb to it. And as mentioned in this podcast interview, we're so numb to it that the Supreme Court is citing existing corruption to decide cases to legalize more corruption, which is bonkers. And they're just not calling it corruption. That's the only difference. So my soapbox today is that we really need to start calling this what it is, because they have created a culture that makes most people just tune out. When you talk about campaign finance laws and PACs, snooze fest. Corruption, that perks up the ear a little bit, and it's just as accurate.
I actually used a part of that series that you were talking about, the podcast series, in episode 1746, What an Actual Attack on Free Speech Looks Like, from The Best of the Left, wherever you listen to your podcast or however we say it. But that one was about the media consolidation part of this. And that is also corruption. This consolidation of media being bought up. And it's worse since we did the episode in October. Now that, Paramount will probably own CNN going forward. There will just be a smaller and smaller amount of voices that tell you what you're supposed to think. So people will not only be politicians that are in a hermetically sealed bubble. The idea is to seal the population into this bubble. It is difficult for us to accept that this is corruption because it is so normalized, and it's also difficult to accept that this is one of the most propagandized societies in the world, because that's the structure of our media environment. There are a few companies that own everything. It's a part of a plan. And that's, when you start talking about conspiracies and conspiracy theorists as a negative thing, it pushes you away from seeing that this is a conspiracy. They're literally, like it was brought up in this episode, there literally were cigar-filled back rooms where this stuff was discussed.
And they wrote it down.
Wrote it down. This is a plan. It has been a plan for a long time. And until we start seeing it clearly and calling it what it is, corruption, that we can't even begin to get out of it.
On the other hand, media consolidation does have a bit of a March Madness vibe to it. So it's sort of exciting. Just like who are going to be the final two? Like, what do your brackets say?
I love the sports tie-in. Yeah.
Oh boy, get on Kelshi. Jesus.
I think this should also be an issue that we're able to bring more people into the fold on. And again, Amanda's strategy of continuously using the word corruption to describe it instead of using theories or hyperfixating on specific companies. Because the fact of the matter is, if it's not one company, there would just be a different company to take their place. It's not like we just have one evil CEO who's running.
Like, get him.
This is a system. And it also kind of incentivizes itself, right? Because of the structure of it. That, again, even if one company wasn't there, there'd be somewhere else. So individual actions of like, cancel this subscription, I understand it makes people feel good because then there's action you can take. And I'm not saying that it doesn't ever have any impact. But if we're ever actually going to change things, you have to aim higher. Like, we just have to look at the full system instead of individual companies that, are subscriptions.
Yeah.
Do they matter as much when they're only competing against 3 other companies?
Yeah. There's the emergency Band-Aid
Yeah,
scenario, which we are in, like, use the power you got. But yeah, like it's so much deeper. The iceberg is huge under the surface,
yeah. And you don't give your money here, you're still money is going towards a company that is still not good. Like they're
Mhm.
doing the same shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to sort of peek under the surface of the water at the rest of the iceberg, this next quote from this article or podcast transcript actually gets at it. So this is talking about soft corruption and referring to an interview with Barack Obama. And I can imagine the audience reacting to this. Fans of Obama are suddenly very defensive and worried about what I'm about to say. Critics of Obama
Yeah.
are like, right, that terrible sellout or whatever. And the reality is much more complicated. So just chill out. So David Sirota in this interview says, quote, "It was one of the most disillusioning interviews I've ever had in my entire life. So long story short, I did a profile of Barack Obama in, I think, 2007. And we were talking about how he had said on his Senate campaign, we need single payer healthcare. The only thing standing in our way is we have to first get a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and the presidency. So obviously, when Barack Obama is elected president a few years later, they have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, and a Democratic president. But in the interim, in between that, before he became president, he had sort of said, I'm not sure if I'm for single payer anymore. He sort of backed out of it. And around 2007, I said, well, you said all we have to do is get a Democratic president in Congress. Why are you already backing off it? And he literally said this, now I'm a senator, and what am I going to say to the people in Illinois who work in the insurance industry? And Sirota thought, like, wow, that's your argument. But he then complicates his own story because he doesn't think it's just Barack Obama having such a soft place in his heart for the insurance companies and the employees who work in Illinois. Sirota goes on and tells this story this way, quote, it's an incredible thing, and I think my takeaway from it is and was at the time, it's not the jobs, it's the money. It's that he knows the insurance industry will come after him. I think this gets to go back to your question about soft corruption, it's very important to understand that there's a kind of silent way that corruption works, which is to say this. I had a senator say to me a year ago, look, if I have a bill that takes on an industry, the political challenge is not only that the industry is going to spend against me, it's that all that industry has to do is shake its pocket change at other senators to keep them away from my bill, end quote. That's the institutional soft corruption at work. They don't even have to spend the money to get the change they want in Congress. They just have to threaten to spend the money. And it cannot help but change how politicians approach issues. They feel like they're unable to approach an issue the way they want, the way they think is moral, the way they might even think would be politically popular, because they're seeing the big picture. Obviously, there's self-preservation. They don't want to lose their jobs, but they might even think like, well, hey, I'm a Democratic senator and I could lose my next race. And if I go really hard on this issue and that makes me lose my next race, well, think of all of the damage that could be done by a Republican senator taking my seat. So there is self-preservation in play, but you could even think of it selflessly and come to the same conclusion, unfortunately. You could still conclude it's better to play it safe and get some progress done or prevent some harm than try to go hard, lose the next election because the money is going to come in against me, and then all is lost in terms of this Senate seat's voting power will switch parties.
Being in Atlanta, I feel like I've had a lot of experience of critiquing Barack Obama specifically and doing it in a way exactly as you said, where you have to preface it with he was set up in a way that like he couldn't succeed. Like the system is so corrupt that it's not one politician. And I think we live in a society where there's a lot of like sycophant, where people just like really are looking for that savior. You know, AOC is one of those people that people just lean into and they're like, this is the person that is going to get it done. And that is not the reality. And if
How
you
have
are
we not learned
betting,
that?
I know, because they'll always disappoint you. And I think that was with Bernie too. Bernie's far from perfect. Now, do I think that Bernie is in a good spot to do more good than harm? Yes. But that doesn't mean that he's impervious to the system around him. Like, he still makes votes that I wouldn't make as a person on the outside of the system. But I think that that's why the accountability can't be on one. There has to be pressure from all of these points to see any kind of change, because as Amanda said, this is widespread corruption and not one person or bad actors within the system. Like, it is the system itself.
And like the anecdote about talking to Obama in 2007, it is orders of magnitude worse now than it was then.
Yeah.
The report just came out recently that 300 billionaires donated 19% of all political donations in 2024. 300 people made 19% of all the political donations. And that's
way less than half.
Yeah. Right. I'm gonna 300 divided by 300 million is a small percentage. It's way less than half. So it's so pervasive, and I know that just the ambient feeling in the country is that we all know this to be true and bad. That is a huge part of the right-wing populist movement, is that they believe that the rich shouldn't run everything in a weird, strange, racist, xenophobic, sexist way. But they do think that there is this elite cabal that is ruling things, again, in a weird funhouse mirror kind of way. But it comes from this sense of reality, this truth that there is a small group of people that are making decisions that affect all of us, and we have very little say-so in it. And that is why democracy is really the solution. We should be talking more about democracy. We should be talking about publicly funded campaigns. We should be talking about what political donations are. They are bribes. These are bribes that if I give you X amount of cash to your campaign, then you will do what I say. But like, Jay brought up earlier, they've already crossed that threshold where you don't even have to have that conversation. The people that are getting that money, it doesn't need to be discussed. It's already set. But the bribes already happened because we all know that these are bribes.
There was something, I didn't pull the quote for this, but somewhere buried in one of the articles we read, talked about this phenomenon as relates to how the Supreme Court understands bribes in politics, corruption in politics. And their solution, they thought, like, let's take them at their word, like they weren't actively encouraging corporations to take over the country. They argued that if money is speech, but we want to avoid corruption, then there just needs to be transparency. You just need to know who's giving what money and where, and then it's out in the open. And so if it looks corrupt, then the voters will know about it. Wink, wink, like voters aren't really going to know about it, but they could theoretically know about it. But the analysis that puts the absurdity of that framing in stark relief is the story that we just heard from David Sirota about the money that you don't have to spend in order to coerce politicians to vote the way you want them to vote. So if a corporation donates $1,000 to a politician that they want to vote their way, but they also threaten to fund the opposition of other politicians, but don't have to actually write a check, none of that gets tallied. So the whole transparency angle is absurd because that's not actually how the movement of the money does the work that it's doing. most of the work that's being done is the threat of money being spent, not actual money being spent.
It's bribery jazz. It's the money you don't spend.
There we go.
Bribery
Thank
jazz. Oh boy.
We
Yeah.
might have an episode title.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Along these lines, I had just read an article, I believe it was in the New York Times, about how candidates, and both sides of the aisle here, this is not one party or the other, are signaling by putting out very specifically and well-crafted social media posts that they might be someone that AI with its ginormously deep pockets or crypto with its ginormously deep pockets might want to pay attention to. And they kind of found this pattern among these candidates who are running for office ahead of the midterms, who are they're trying to skirt campaign finance laws. How many people just glazed over? They're trying to be corrupt without actually, without like doing the backroom deals. Okay. They're trying to be corrupt without doing the secret part, doing it out loud. It's just a matter of if anyone notices. And so they're putting out these social media posts that are like very pro AI or very pro crypto. And they, of course, some of them are trying to walk a line, but at the end of the day, it's just a post that is pro AI or crypto. And what this pattern reveals is that they are hoping that an AI company or crypto company will notice them and then write them a giant check without them having to ask or, go through the back channels. Oh, it's just money landed in my lap. I don't know why. It's almost like we're at the next level. Like we've reached like corruption nirvana or something, where now it's just vibes and trying to signal without signaling, but the system is still working exactly the way it's supposed to, right? That's the whole idea. And it just made me nauseous because I'm like, how are we here? Especially while reading this interview and talking about where we were back in the 60s and 70s, which they point out was not perfect. There was still plenty of corruption, but we had more regulation, we had more control and more enforcement. And that is gone. And whatever is left, which is not much, is pretty much on the chopping block right now.
Amanda, what you just described was the official merger of influencers and politicians. Because if someone tuned out for 5 seconds and didn't hear that you were talking about politicians, they would have rightly assumed that you were talking about a YouTuber who's like, no, like they're not sponsors of this video, but I really do love their product. But like, hey, hit me up. That's
exactly.
That
is totally what's happening without the hit me up. They just don't have to say that part. Yeah.
Well, and feel free to fact check me on this, but recently I read that now lobbyists in our government that represent the AI sector, it's 1 in 4 of lobbyists that are showing up. So heavy influence. This is obviously the new frontier and where we're going to see heavy corruption. So something to look out for. I do, though, want to take a second because I know we're talking a lot about politicians, and not that they need me to defend them in any kind of way, but like we are talking about a system. So just to give an idea, like, yes, politicians, but also you have the think tanks that are using industry funded research to shape policy and also float that to the politicians. And then you have your media. And as we've talked about, they're just monopolizing. So they bring on corporate friendly representative or experts from these think tanks when they're having these discussions about policy. And then also our regulatory agencies are often captured, and it has to do with the personnel placement that they end up having that's connected back to the industry. So when we're talking about a system, we are literally talking about an intricate system that has all these different factors into it. And it's not just, politicians who are accepting bribes. Yes, that's part of the corruption, but it is widespread corruption.
Yeah, this is part of the master plan, is the origin story of the Heritage Foundation, which brought us lots of horrific legislation, including the Project 2025 plan, which we are now seeing executed.
Yeah, and that's a perfect summary of what I just said, because that's exactly what the Heritage Foundation leveraged in order to get these plans out to politicians.
So just so people don't get too, despairing of our current situation, Sirota does have some positive things he can point to. There are burgeoning movements. I mean, people have been in a movement against Citizens United, the very boring sounding Supreme Court ruling that legalized corruption to the degree that it is legalized currently since 2010. And really, as things continue to get worse, I mean, I mentioned at the top of the show, like the worse things get, perversely, the more hopeful it is that there will be change, because eventually it gets too obvious and people get too pissed off. And then there's a breaking point. So anyway, Sirota is talking about that there's a state-based effort where the argument is that states are the ones that decide whether corporations get the same rights as human beings. And he says, quote, states have the right to say corporations have these powers, but they don't have these powers because their powers flow from state law. So that means you can change state law to say corporations no longer have the power to spend in elections, end quote. And they go on to explain that even if a company is registered in Delaware, they still have to follow the state laws wherever they operate. So Montana is one of the first states with a ballot measure to change the law to say that companies that operate within the state can't spend money on politics in Montana. And that's a bit of a game changer. I mean, really could be an absolute game changer. And I mean, Deon already brought up public financing of elections, but that's a huge one. So Sirota on that topic says, quote, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, or progressive, the system itself doesn't discriminate for that. If you want more candidates outside the privately financed corruption system, whatever your politics are, then public financing systems, which exist in various cities and states, should be expanded. It's gotten very close to passing at the congressional level at various times in our history. It's a very old idea. Teddy Roosevelt was the first to suggest it, end quote. I mean, that's a huge one. There's a whole side story in that discussion about how there would not be a Mayor Zoran Mamdani without the public financing system in New York City. And so, as is made clear in the quote we just read, that doesn't make it a pro-socialist system. It makes it a pro-outsider system. It makes it, if you want to confront the establishment from the right or the left, the public financing system is there to help you.
Yeah, it seems so simple. Like, it just seems like something we could have. Like, I just don't. I mean, I'm so glad that someone like Mamdani used this system, because that was a big attention field race. Now, granted, it's because New York has this system in place, but still, the fact that it got so much attention probably is making a lot of people think, well, gee, why can't we do that where I live? Like, I would hope anyway.
I wish it was hit upon a little bit more. I mean, we're deep in it, so of course, I'm sure all of us saw about the public finance, but I know I've had conversations with people where I had to explain New York system. So I would have liked it to just be elevated a little bit more, because I'm with you, Amanda. It seems so simple. And it seems like it would eliminate a lot of this. And it also makes office more accessible, which honestly has been a huge problem now that we're spending so much on elections, and not even just federal level, but even state levels. More and more money is getting dumped into campaigns. So I would love to see public financing of campaigns. Come on.
Someone should run on that.
Yeah,
you heard it here. Yeah. I'm just kidding.
Like that is, it's a, just a joke, but like someone should run on that. Like a lot of people. No,
it's not a joke.
Like, yeah, like yeah, a lot of people should run on that. There should be a group that says we're not doing this, because there are plenty of politicians who I guess don't mind being sock puppets, but that's what a lot of these people are. They are bought and sold. They, I think it's a Robin Williams joke that they should wear the badges of whoever donated to their campaign on their suits, like a NASCAR track. Like they're owned. That's what they are, and some of them don't mind it, but the average person does like to have some sense of agency, some sense of like, I am kind of independent, or at least just beholden to the people that I'm supposedly representing. That probably feels a little better than I am run by Shell I'm run by ExxonMobil. Like that can't feel good to the average person. So when average people decide to start running, which is a thing that will probably start to happen more, because a lot of people are saying that this is a problem of not being represented by people who share your values. So when people start running and saying that I'm not going to take this money from this company or this corporation or whatever, that limits the power of that money. It's a long fight. It is really easy to point out all the flaws because there are so many, and it is a kind of daunting to point out the fixes, which is what we're trying to do here, because they're simple to say, but they're not going to be easy to do. There is this gigantic structure that we are fighting against, and it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time to build enough momentum, but we always will have the numbers, but it is harder to get those numbers together. It is easier to get a small group of very rich people to be on the same page because they really seem to only care about one thing, being more rich. Whereas the rest of us have a bunch of diverse interest, care, concerns. But if we could get behind the idea that first and foremost, these people shouldn't decide all the things that we do, that's the driving force to make some of this change.
Yeah. And I guess I do want to point out, because we were talking about someone should run on this. There was a campaign about a little over a decade ago for candidates to run solely practically on the message of getting money out of politics and ending this corruption. And it got a fair amount of attention, and some of those candidates were elected. But that kind of tells you how intense the system is and how much money there is out there fighting against it, because that should have been a fairly winning message in most of the places that they ran these candidates. And it was candidates, Republicans and Democrats, but it was hard. It was a really hard battle. So yes, I think it's fair to say this is not going to be easy, but we do know the path forward. We do know what we need to do. And that's, a pretty big first step.
I think also part of why you don't see it as widely talked about, especially in more media conglomerate spaces, is like, what can you say about it? The drawbacks or arguments against, they just feel, I don't know, what? You don't want your taxes going towards that? We spend taxes money on so many other things I
How
don't
about
support.
on
That
billions of dollars of war?
Of course. So, I mean, like, I don't think it's a winning argument to push back on it. And honestly, in publicly funded campaigns, it would therefore make it a marketplace of ideas. And that's what you would have to run on and win on, is your ideas. And of course, that means there's going to be a bunch of people dumping money into opponents if there is a candidate who wants publicly funded campaigns, because they know in the marketplace of ideas, saying that you're going to give tax breaks to corporations, that you're going to deregulate things that protect everyday people, those aren't popular. Those aren't winning ideas. The only thing that you can do, what? The other party's bad. They demonize them, scare people. And then I also, obviously, if everybody's on the same playing ground, the threat of dumping so much money into opposing candidates, it doesn't have the same threat level, right? Because they're still going to have to compete on that idea level. And I think that is one of the most attractive things, because then we could actually have politicians pushing for things that I think they actually support. I don't think some of my representatives are as bad as they act when they're in the Senate, right? Because I think it's the fear, right? That if, I don't do what the Democratic establishment wants me to do, then they're just going to fund an opponent who's going to take my seat. And then where will we be?
Yeah. And of course, with the Congress so mostly evenly split, that is a huge consequence of, losing your seat. Yeah.
And sort of to sum up the argument against publicly funded elections, what people have been sort of parroting for decades, the decades that I've been paying attention, is that's welfare for politicians. Politicians are corrupt. They don't deserve extra help. The actual answer to that is, yeah, politicians are corrupt. They're in a corrupt system. That means that politicians are going to work for the people who pay them. If you want them to work for the people, it has to be the people who pay for elections. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, not just salary, elections, the mechanism that gets them into office. Yeah.
Mic drop, walk away.
Little side note, the corruption of the system is so pervasive that the word welfare is a pejorative.
Right.
Yeah.
Welfare. Welfare's good.
Yeah.
Controversial take.
Yeah, it's in the Constitution. It's kind of what the government is here for, is to provide for the general welfare. Next up, what progressives can do to fight the corruption of the system from inside the system. This is another current affairs article. The left is losing because we're not confrontational enough, by Jordan Bollag. And I really appreciated this article. I feel like I've been waiting for someone to take the time to make this point for a while. Maybe this person isn't the first, but it's the first I came across. So sort of laying the groundwork. They say, quote, "The electoral left is losing because it is pursuing the hopeless strategy of confining itself to indoor backroom deal negotiations while remaining friendly and accommodating to the Democratic establishment in public. Progressives in D.C. are losing because they refuse to strongly and persistently call out the corruption of their Democratic colleagues. They refuse to draw red lines for their votes and stick to them. And most importantly, they refuse to mobilize their base," end quote. Now, if you listen to other corners of the left on the internet, this is where the discussion usually turns to calling people like Bernie and AOC sellouts and sheepdogs for the Democratic Party, and they're all crap, and what we need is real socialism. And then I inevitably ask, I love your passion, tell me how to do it. And that's when they stop responding. But I've always wanted to find a middle path argument that better addresses the actual shortcomings that I also recognize in these politicians in Congress, but without the demonization and they're sellouts and they're corrupt or they were always full of shit or whatever arguments get made, because those answers are too simple. It never sat right with me because it's too simple. I don't believe it. And it turns out there are actually better reasons for, like, if you elected a progressive to Congress or know about one like, Bernie or AOC or whoever, and they're not living up to your ideals, there are explanations. So Democratic Socialist and Rhode Island State Senator Sam Bell had this to say, quote, "I think what holds people back is not a strategic goal. It's your emotional strength. It takes an enormous amount of emotional strength to stand against a political establishment, to stand against the group of people you're spending time with all the time. It really wears you down emotionally," end quote. And then AOC explains also, quote, "The halls of Congress are no joke. It is no joke to stand up to corporate power and established interests. Behind closed doors, your arm is twisted, political pressure gets put on you, and every trick in the book, psychological and otherwise, is used to get you to abandon the working class," end quote. So what this gets at is, like, if you stop here, you might still hold to the idea like, well, they just need to be stronger. If that's what it's like and it's hard, well, but that's your job. Your job is to stand up against those forces. Okay, but the evidence shows that the people who are the best seemingly suited to do that still have an incredible amount of trouble succeeding with that strategy. So, like, maybe taking the human element, as just described, the emotional wear, it wears you down. You have all these forces arrayed against you, and you're in the halls of power, not surrounded by lobbyists who support your ideas and are ready to shovel money into your campaign coffers or just encourage you that the corruption you're taking part in is the correct moral thing to do, because the establishment absolutely has that. Progressives don't. So taking into consideration the human element of what it is like to be a progressive in the halls of power might help point the way to a better approach, which this article also gets to.
We're going to fight a battle in this way that is even more challenging than I think most of us are willing to acknowledge. If you work at a regular job and you work with objectively shitty people, but you work with them on a regular basis, it's hard to just go up against them on a daily basis every
Mhm.
time they are shitty. Eventually, you're just like, you ignore them, you move on, or you just accept the least shitty thing they do and just, it's just a human nature thing. And I think it explains like the equal and opposite why Donald Trump is probably the most transformative president since, I don't know, FDR, is because he doesn't give a
Someone's
shit
gonna
what
pull that
anyone.
out of
Yeah.
context.
Well, like I transformative in a negative way. Let me emphasize
Negatively
that. But like,
transformative.
he doesn't give a shit what other human beings think because he's incapable. So
Yeah.
he just bends people to his will because
Yep.
he pushes and pushes and pushes and pushes, and he doesn't care because he's undiagnosed psychopath. And that's a whole party full of those people or people that will follow those people. Whereas what we're trying to do as progressives is coming from the very human place of wanting to help other people and naturally probably want to get along with people in that same vein. We're not going to have a sociopath that wants to do good for people. We're not going to have some individual that just doesn't care what anyone thinks, but also is going to do good things for people. Those two things don't usually go together. So we need a structure that fosters a group of people that can come together and do things and have some, solidarity so that they can fight these slings and arrows that are coming at them from all different directions as a group. The squad is like the small
Right.
version of
Seriously.
that. We need
Yeah.
a broader squad.
Mm-hmm.
What you just hit on is my only pushback on the article. Like the framing of emotional strength, I think takes away from like the system of it, which is that once you get elected, it does become a little more isolating. So you may have very strong morals that you're following, which led you to being elected. But once you're in there, yeah, you're with a bunch of people who have differing views. They're, again, representing other interests. So I think some of the most successful candidates that we've seen have strong roots with activists, like grassroots organizations. They're very well connected so that it doesn't feel as isolating when you're just, one voice amongst the crowd. So I would like to see, of course, a stronger progressive caucus that is pushing for, legislation. But I also think that as progressive organizers and activists, it's also our obligation to continue providing that feedback, continue showing up for those candidates. And I think Mandani actually will be a good case study of that. As we look forward, he had such strong organizing around him, pushing for his values. And like when he got elected, that was one of the things that he pointed to, that it's going to take all of us because as I'm, proposing we do X, I also need the organizers pushing, to put pressure on the systems that are blocking. And so I'm curious a couple years from now, looking at him and how he taps into organizers, if he stays closer to, his campaign promises than other politicians have because he's well connected to the community that he's serving. Whereas again, other representatives, they lose that connection. They might have it in specific ways, but not an overall connection, a, deep rooted one that again, we've seen in very successful politicians.
So, as I said, this article does point to another way, another approach for progressives. And it says this: on November 15th, 2013, a socialist economist named Kshama Sawant was elected to the Seattle City Council, not as a Democrat, but as a member of the Marxist Party Socialist Alternative. Having operated under a very different political strategy than progressives in DC, Kshama Sawant and the Socialist Alternative movement represent exactly how the left can effectively use elected office to deliver substantive results for the working class. And continuing, it says, her fighting approach includes the critical understanding that elected office is not a friendly arena where progressives can privately convince corporate politicians to do the right thing, but a battlefield of raw power where the Democratic establishment is an enemy that must be forced into giving concessions. Sawant is able to maintain this radical fighting approach without being politically marginalized because she comes out of, remains accountable to, and is in constant dialogue with grassroots social movements. And then referring back to pieces previously in the article talking about fights she had won, it says, quote, the decisions made in the fights for the Amazon tax or the $15 minimum wage were not made by Sawant herself, but were voted on at action conferences where anyone from Sawant to a new volunteer had an equal say. In fact, Sawant never simply decided to run for office, but only did so reluctantly when, as a member of Socialist Alternative, the organization democratically decided that she should be the candidate they run. End quote. That is a different approach. And what's core to it is understanding the human dynamic, understanding that people are going to go in to an unfriendly arena and be influenced by it. That is understanding the human nature of politics. And so having a structure in place, just as the wealthy do, to ensure that the politicians who go into the arena have the full backing of their constituents so that they can maintain their position and not negotiate too far. Doesn't mean don't negotiate. It means don't negotiate too far. You have a collective movement behind you that says, here's what we want. Here's how far back you can negotiate. And if you go past that, you're going to lose our support. So the politician essentially has no choice. But that's the point. The point is to have the politician be willingly put between the rock of the opposition and the hard place of your constituents who say, we will not support you indefinitely. We will support you if you do what our collective decision making has decided needs to be done, or get as close as possible while negotiating, but only negotiating so far as we deem reasonable.
The other element here that I don't know if it was directly said, but is obviously implied, is that having an organization behind you, having people who are engaged behind you, means that when you are going to bat for a certain policy, the people who are not the representatives can make that argument a popular discussion topic. Like they can organize to talk to their neighbors, to have town hall events where maybe that's the thing that we discuss. They can make the case, they can do flyers, they can do, like, there is an infrastructure in place that is not just hoping the candidate goes and wins their fight. Because as I think we all know from following politics, it's one thing to go into the arena and make your case, but it's another thing if the thing you're fighting for is in the conversation, is what everyone is talking about, it's on the local news, it's city council meeting topics, like the drive to get that whole community talking about that very thing and then being able to make your case is an important element of that politician being able to win in the arena. Because suddenly, if you can get that critical mass that basically is overwhelming support for something, the other side is going to start to think, how much of a fight do we want to put up here? How much are we actually going to lose or pay for before this isn't really worth it anymore? And without millions of dollars in the bank behind you, you have to find ways like that, actual community organizing tactics, to be able to bolster support for an issue.
There are some real contradictions in American life. And I think a big one is that in this hyper individualistic society, saying that we also have a representative democracy, those two things don't go together. You can't be just a atomized group of individuals and have a representative that represents just these atomized group of individuals. What we're talking about here is actual representative democracy. It is a group of people who come together, literally select their own representative, and that representative is in dialogue with the group to decide what the group wants. The negotiation happens among the group, and then that person goes further and negotiates with the other people. But we're talking about having representative democracy, and in order to do that, we have to have more collectivism. And I know that is a scary word in America. That's another thing we're fighting here, because that stuff has been demonized. Because the people that are genuinely a collective, the top 0.01%, because they do have solidarity, they are representative because they have consolidated behind this idea that they should be represented. And we have to do the same thing in smaller groups, in communities, and we take that, we build from that. This is about a city council, but you can build on that. Think of it as like a pyramid where we go up to the top of representation, but that representative that is in the House is also part of a smaller collective that is part of our larger group of collectives. This is how we actually get representative democracy, but we have to be engaged. And I think that's the
Yeah.
huge part of it. Like, regular people have to be engaged. And that's going back to the beginning, this smoke-filled room stuff of all these systems put in place to keep us disengaged, to keep us feeling like there's nothing we can do, to keep us feeling like we're fighting a losing battle, so why even try? To keep us so busy that we couldn't possibly make the time to do all this. But this is the solution: more engagement, being more involved, being a part of something. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people can relate to. I think a lot of people, I'll go back to the, the populist right-wing movement, is this feeling of not being involved, not being part of something. It's a weird way to go, but I do understand the urge and how people end up there because they do feel like they're part of something. We can do the same in a more positive direction that does make things better for more people.
What you're saying is exactly what I was going to hit upon, because as Jay said in the beginning, even though things are getting dramatically worse, that's actually the prime time for them to get better. I think this myth of rugged individualism is falling apart actively. And you do see that, Deon, as you pointed out, the manosphere, right? The incel, what is it? Oh, a community, an incel community. You have it both on the left and the right, that people are actively looking for ways to come together, to be collective, to be in community with one another. And I think, what we're talking about, there are pieces of this puzzle that already exist. They're not connected yet. So there are grassroots, activism currently going on. There's movements, there's people who are involved. It's just a little fragmented and it's disconnected from our representatives, as we're talking about. And so I think it's really just that coming together. And I think that's what we're going to shift to. I'm not known to be naive necessarily, but I am optimistic. And I think the writing is there that, people may be misled, but I think that everybody knows things are bad and there's disconnection in our society, especially in the United States currently. And I don't think that's ideal for anyone. Obviously, not including the 1% who are making a shit ton of money off of it. But, everyday people, it's not good for the right. It's not good for the left. It's just not good for everyday people. So I think there is a shift coming.
Yeah, I don't know. I would put that 1% in the group of people who this isn't good for. They're not particularly.
I was going to say the same.
The happiest, most well-adjusted.
The least happy people on planet Earth, actually.
Wait, hold on. I absolutely agree with that.
Okay.
But you can't tell them that. They wouldn't say that, I agree with you. I think, we don't have healthy 1%ers. They're not connected. You don't really have friendships when you're at that level of wealth. You have associates and, people who benefit. Transactions. Exactly. All relationships are transactional at that level of wealth. So I agree with you, but also fuck them. So but again, to go back to the optimistic point that I was trying to make, I think all the pieces are there. We just got to put the full puzzle together and we'll see drastic change in the next, 20, 30 years.
Shh, quiet.
Stay tuned.
It's gradual and then it's all of a sudden.
Yeah, gradual but all at once. Okay, that is
exactly
positive.
Exactly. And so to get a more direct look inside how this works, there's another quote from another politician. This is Democratic Socialist and Illinois State Senator Robert Peters saying, quote, "I try to tie myself to the movement as much as possible because I am the conduit for their organized power and governing position, and they are the conduit for me being able to govern the way I want to. And if those are tied together, it makes it easier to get things done under the dome. I believe that my office should be a conduit for organizing, for movement spaces. So basically opening it up, Whether it's mutual aid efforts on the South Side, it's hosting meetings, it's being part of meetings, and sometimes when I'm not able to get something done, being held accountable. I try to make sure that I'm tied as much as possible. And I will ask, when we pass the bill, I was talking to the coalition about negotiations on the bill. I said, they're trying to do this in the bill, and I need to know, how far am I allowed to go? I remember saying to my colleague on the floor, my people won't let me go any further. That's it. I can't negotiate any further. And he finishes by saying, we're not as weak as people think. So this is like the most pop culture reference I'll probably ever make. And Amanda will laugh because she knows how much I enjoy the reality show, The Traitors. And what this reminds me of is when people go in to play this game, where the whole point is to go in and lie and cheat and betray people, and you're trying to win money. And of course, everyone goes, they like leave their family and they go and play this game on TV. And they're thinking to themselves, if I win this game, that'll be really great for my family. And so they go in and they're like, I want to do something good for my family. Like, it might also be fun and it'll be an enjoyable experience. But like, if I come out the other side with some money, that'll be good for the family. But then they get in and they start forming bonds with people and they get emotionally attached. And all of a sudden, these people are like their new best friends, and everyone's like new brothers and sisters, even they start describing, and it plays with their head. Like if they went in with the laser focus of, I am not here to make friends, I want to earn money for my family, it doesn't last. They can't do it. But there are a few who like steadfastly manage to hold on to that idea. They remember, I have a family back home, they really need this money, but they're absolutely the rarity in those shows because that's not how humans work. That's not how we're wired. When we're around people, we start to like them. When we like people, we like to work with them. We like to compromise with them. It is hard to stay laser focused all the time unless you're actually like bound. The idea that that guy describing, like, I tie myself to the movement, that is the Odyssey. You have to tie yourself to the mast to prevent the sirens from dragging you to the bottom. That is the right metaphor because it's, as AOC said, it is no joke. You're not just going to like sail in there and it's going to be fine because like, hey, I'm a progressive. I have my beliefs. I'm not going to go back on them. Man, you don't know what you're in for. You have to tie yourself to the mast, tie yourself to the movement that is supporting you. And so for everyone else who is not running for something, those people who say, not just I'm dedicated to progressive policies and not just I'm dedicating to getting money out of politics, but also I am dedicated to tying myself to the movement that puts me in office. Those are the people who are going to be able to stay more true to their values structurally, not because they're better human beings or because you're like, oh, you found the one who isn't full of shit. That's not how any of this works. They're the ones who understand that they need structural help when they are under the dome, negotiating and trying to get things done.
Exactly. And, as you were describing this, it started to make me think about how, if we were in a system where people got something more often, like actual legislation that made a difference in their lives, maybe there wouldn't be this kind of militancy about holding the line. And if you waver at all, well, then screw you. Because I think this environment of getting screwed and not being represented has created a situation where now it's like, well, the only way to get even a morsel is to have someone in there who will never waver, who is perfect, who meets the litmus test and is a rock solid, concrete, they can't be moved. But of course, the system is built to move people. That is like what happens as they're all describing once you get inside. And so it's hard to have sympathy. And I get this, like the people that you were talking about at the start, Jay, who say like, well, they're sellouts and whatever. Like it's hard to have sympathy when you have been getting nothing. You have been getting crumbs at the best, but mostly nothing for a very long time. It's hard to recognize what is happening to those people that you championed and might have voted for and hoped were going to change things. But they can't do it alone. And the entire idea of having these heroes or somebody who's going to get in there, do it. Deon mentioned the squad. What were there, like 5, 6? Maybe there were a little more at the peak. Might have been a few more than that, like 7 at the peak. And now they're dwindling in number. And so you can't expect the whole system to get overturned by just having a few people in there who are fighting these headwinds, where they are just getting pushed and rocked around and trying to find out, where can I actually make some progress here? And it's fine not to have sympathy for them. That's fine. If you want to try someone else instead, try someone else instead. But the system is what keeps making you disappointed. The system is what makes these people who you send in there to do a job not able to work for you. It's not the human, it's not the individual that is only responsible. They are to some degree, sure, but that's a small percentage of what's happening. So the direction, as we say often on this show, is aim higher, fight the system itself. The people are not insignificant, but they're not the main issue here.
Jay broke out the pop culture reference, so I feel like I get to bring out one too. This is, I mean, specifically, I think we're talking about fighting the Democratic establishment, but the corollary of people that don't want to criticize any Democratic candidate because the Republicans are so bad. And I'm thinking of Andor, the TV show, the rebellion. Like, we've got a senator working in the Senate who was unable to make any changes until she left the Senate and became part of a smaller group that realized that you're not going to change it from the inside. It's the whole structure that's bad. There were people in there that were very amenable and wanted to do things the right way, but the whole structure was taken over. The whole thing is the problem. And, AOC, I do like her as a politician, limitations as a, human being. There's only so much she can do. We have to think of this as we are fighting a rebellion against a massive empire, because that's what this is. I mean, we're watching it right now. Like, as we're recording, we are at war number, I don't know how many in my lifetime, that isn't even being described for a reason. And we have Democratic politicians who are more upset that it didn't get a vote that they probably would have voted for to go to war than they are about the fact that we're at war for no discernible reason. And we are spending billions of dollars. The Pentagon recently released a report that said it was 11.3 for the first week of the war.
And that's the low ball.
Which is what they're reporting. Exactly. So who knows how much we're spending? This is a giant problem that we have to think. The resistance or whatever, it's kind of like the tossed around. No, like, really, we need to start thinking it that way. Mm-hmm. We are fighting a massive structure that has to come down
and be replaced with something better.
So, yeah.
I just want to speak for all of the Star Wars historians out there yelling at us that, yes, America actually was what George Lucas had in mind when he wrote Star Wars and was thinking of the Vietnam War, another war that we had no business being in. There was no real discernible reason. And we went and spent billions of dollars and many, many lives. And America was the empire in Star Wars, and the Viet Cong were the rebels.
Yep. So we're going to be the Viet Cong. That's the message of this podcast.
Oh, great.
No. Okay. Maybe we could do it a little differently.
Now I feel like we're just like throwing out fun pop culture references. So now, like, we're the Fire Nation.
Yes, that's my favorite one.
Just
Thank
as
you,
Zuko pushed back on it, we all have to hold our
Right.
politicians accountable to push back. Don't be the Fire Nation.
Team Avatar.
So what should we be trying to do with any power we can wield, and what hope do we have of anything good coming to pass anytime soon? This brings us to our third current affairs article, because they are a good publication, titled Searching the Globe for Answers to America's Thorniest Problems. And this is actually an excerpt from Natasha Hakimi Zapata's book, Another World is Possible. So they write, quote, In the face of creeping authoritarianism, following decades of bipartisan failure to address skyrocketing inequality, many Americans are urgently asking ourselves what kind of society we truly want to live in. Ultimately, that is the question at the root of all the policies I examined, from Singapore to New Zealand and Estonia to Costa Rica. Do we want to live in a society like Singapore, where housing is a right? How about Norway, where working families can count on guaranteed government support to raise their children? Or Finland, where everyone can count on receiving the best possible education in their neighborhood school? Or New Zealand, where people can age without fear of destitution? Or Estonia, where public services and direct democracy initiatives have been made universally accessible online? Or Portugal, where addiction is treated as a public health issue rather than a criminal one? Or Uruguay and Costa Rica, where clean energy and biodiversity protections safeguard the planet that humans and so many other species depend on. Or the United Kingdom, where healthcare is a universal right, end quote. Obviously, I just had to read that quote for the sheer weight of it. There are so many examples from so many countries around the world of people coming to the conclusion that they should do things better than the United States is. I'll just phrase it that way. They have decided to do things for people. They have used their politics and they have used their collective wealth in their countries, large or small, and decided, let's use our power, what money we have, to do something good for the people who live within our borders. And that is not something you actually see the United States doing very often.
I've, on a personal level, been very engaged with the healthcare system recently. And that is like the most stark example of this being a society that does not work for the people within the society. It is about extraction of resources. Like, just everything about this society seems like just it's an extractive exercise. You go to work and you take all that money to pay for all these services that makes you wonder, like, why am I also getting all these taxes taken out? And it's constant that what is good about what is taken out in your taxes is being chipped away, chipped away, chipped away, while what is terrible about your taxes is being increased over time, as we watch again over $1 billion a day be dropped on the heads of people who did nothing to us. I'm not talking about the Iranian regime in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking about other human beings going about their life
Children
day to
in
day,
school.
children's school, just doing life like we're trying to do under a regime that they probably don't like, just like us. This is a society that we have accepted as normal when none of this has to be normal. Like, we don't have to have a society where only a few people get any of the benefits from the society, let alone all of the benefits. Like, that's not what this has to be. There's no rule that says it has to be this way. There's no rule that says there's only a Republican Party, only a Democratic Party. That's it. This is just the way it's evolved over time. We can make things better for more people. We have to start pushing a vision of something better. But as long as we don't push a vision, there are people who do have a vision, and it's the people that Erin said are terrible, and fuck them, because they have an addiction. The people with the biggest addiction in the country are running the country like addicts, trying to feed that addiction. And we need to take them into some sort of therapy for that addiction in the most humane, thoughtful way possible.
By toppling the system?
By just destroying the source of their addiction. Like, we've got to make wholesale changes, and it's not just stuff around the margins, because stuff around the margins is what we've been doing for years and years and years, and those margins keep getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, actually, all of this is making me think of, it's actually a very old Lee Camp quote to credit it, but we've been saying it for a very long time, that evil people have plans and whiteboards and office supplies, and normal people are just thinking about what's for dinner that night. And I think I said this a long time ago, like, it just has been, I mean, God, every day practically, it's just more and more crystal clear that they want the world that they are creating so bad. And so we have to want the world we want to exist so much more than they want their world. And it's hard because it's a complete imbalance. We are not equally matched here. That's why we have to want it so badly. And that means, time and energy and sacrificing a normal, peaceful life, or, whatever you want to call it. Like, that just means effort for a long, sustained time, which is hard. It is hard. It's never pretend that such a thing is easy. But they started their plans, as we started the show, 50 years ago, and were patient and just kept on their course, and they have achieved what they wanted. And we now have to take the lessons. They were talking about how the right in the 70s, it took lessons from the civil rights movement to create the world that they wanted. Well, now we have to flip this again and say, let's learn those lessons again to make sure that we get the world that we deserve and need. I don't pretend that this is easy. I really don't. I just think we have to start finding the motivation. We're all tired. We're all sick of it. We're all horrified and just, some are numb. Some are, not paying attention, sticking their heads in the sand. Like, we have to find that motivation to go up against the powers that be in this fight.
Well, and it's so indicative of if you make a reference towards, somewhere else of like, oh man, maybe this could be better in the United States. Like, let's look at Canada's healthcare system, or it like automatically has to be that's the worst. There's no answer of America could be better than Canada. Like we could figure it out. Like it always
where's the
has to be
nationalism, the pride.
Yeah. And it doesn't exist when you're pointing out problems, right? The narrative behind American exceptionalism has to be pushed so fervently because we're not exceptional. We don't do most things the best, except for, we can't even say war anymore. Like starting wars, yes. Finishing them or winning them.
Yeah.
And there's no winners in war. But got to get my progressive remark in there. But back to, this article, I put this book, Another World is Possible, on my reading list because I think as progressives, we often want to educate ourselves on the problems and we want to like really be able to articulate what's wrong. And I think we forget that we got to have a vision. We have to dream of a better world. I remember this was before we were on YouTube, but several Solved episodes ago, we were talking about how important it is in fiction writing for there to be that better vision, that utopia, that we can dream of things, that we can put ourselves in what that would be like. And I stand by that. I definitely think that, as progressives, we have to hold on to that hope. And it's also so defeating to just constantly inundate yourselves with what's wrong in the world. And I'm not saying don't stay informed. Of course, do that. But do the other work too, which is the hope building, the world building. Let's work towards a utopia because, the fact of the matter is we're never going to get to utopia because utopia is always going to get better and better. Like the more we progress as a society, the further we're also going to want to push society.
Yeah.
So
if you don't hit the moon, you'll end up in the stars, right? Let's
right. Yeah. And we'll laugh because we're like, oh, how corny. But no, we need to be a little corny now. Like the world feels really heavy and defeating right now. It is hard to go day by day without feeling hopeless, without feeling like we're losing. But again, I'm going to say this for the second time. Ash J started us. Like when things are getting real bad, it is that opportunity for things to get immensely better because, people understand how bad things are right now. And I truly believe that. They might not know all the intricate details, but they know how bad it is.
Yeah. And then when looking at all of the different things that are bad, it's important to recognize that so much of the badness is interconnected, which then makes so much sense why the solutions are also interconnected. So continuing from this book excerpt, it says, as I observed throughout my travels, many key policies intersect with one another. Portugal's drug discrimination is a legal shift, but it is aided by the country's universal healthcare system, which offers addiction treatment and other care free at the point of delivery, like the UK's NHS. Robust old age pensions are essential, but if housing becomes unaffordable, as it increasingly has in New Zealand, more and more of pensioners' checks will go toward housing and leave little for other needs. This intersection of housing with other needs is something Singapore realized early on in its design for public housing. In other words, while any progress is made on any front is welcome, we need to, dare I say it, do it all. Contrary to what we're often told about progressive policies, we can have them all. Not only can we afford to, the truth is that we simply can't afford not to. End quote. Recognizing that progressive policies are not just things that pay out and drain the bank. They are a fundamental shift in how we see the approach to governance and policy to, again, help people, focus on helping people, and recognize that if you allow society to deteriorate far enough and that people have very little help and support, you end up with a very unhappy, very fragmented, angry society that ends up incredibly polarized because the rich are going to do what they always do, which is convince people to blame each other instead of aiming their anger upwards where it belongs. And having good sets of policies that help people prevent that from happening too. So whether you're on the right or the left, you are probably sick and tired of how angry politics makes you. And if we had a governing system that supported people, you wouldn't have as much to be angry about. And you wouldn't have your anger being misdirected at your neighbors instead of the billionaires benefiting from the system.
Yep.
The hopeful takeaway from this is, again, from the article, it says, profound societal change often begins in moments of deep crisis. In Britain, the national health system was born from the blood-stained devastation of World War II. Portugal's radical drug reforms arose from the desperation created by dual epidemics unlike any the country had seen. Estonia, Finland, Singapore, and Norway all designed their own policies in the midst of financial crisis that required them to reimagine the very foundations of their economies. Faced with environmental devastation, Uruguay and Costa Rica found ways to tackle the climate and biodiversity crises head on. All these historically difficult periods had one thing in common. They forced their citizens not just to hope for better, but to work toward better. And people in these countries took it upon themselves to do so. And so the conclusion, inevitably, is, it says, the lesson is crystal clear. Some of the most effective and longest lasting solutions are forged in the darkest of times as we look up from the pits of despair and envision a way out. More importantly, it's at times like these that we learn how not to fall back in. End quote. So to summarize, step one, recognize how bad things are and get pissed off enough and get enough people pissed off enough to be able to, number two, build movements that are strong enough that politicians can lash themselves to so that when they go into the halls of power, they can actually hold their own, while they are, three, asking for absolutely everything to change, because that's the level of change we actually need.
Boom.
Now I think we solved it.
Yeah, I'm going to put that book on my list too. I need a little injection of what things could be.
All right. Well, if you'd like to chime in or just simply cheer on the call to fundamentally change our politics, you can record and re-record until you're happy with it a voice message by tapping the link in the show notes. You can reach us on Signal at the handle bestofleft.01 or simply email me to j@bestofleft.com. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.